All right, welcome in. KSO Postgame Live. Mason Voth, KSU fan here, as K-State sees their season come to an end, probably in a fashion that a lot of people would have predicted it to at various points in the season. A pretty lifeless performance for the Wildcats as they lose to Baylor 70-56. In a lot of ways, the score is a lot friendlier to K-State than what the performance was, and we're just back in this position where we were so many times this season outside of that 6-game stretch where you question a lot of things, whether it's on a day-to-day basis, but also a long-term experience for K-State basketball. And then, I go back to, you did the show with me right after they lost to Wichita State. I was still in Koch Arena. And to me, that's the most embarrassing loss K-State took all season. The way it happened, who it happened to, and the way everything was handled after that game, I thought was pretty poor by K-State. And it was embarrassing. And that's the word that I think more times than not you would use to describe a lot of the outcomes and situations that K-State basketball found themselves in this year. And now they finished 16-17. Who knows if they play in the Crown or some silly tournament, but this feels a lot different than last year when we're talking about, do you want to play in the NIT or not? Because I think we were all, yeah, you want to play in the NIT. I don't know that it matters with a team that you maybe at best only want 3 or 4 guys to come back and play on, and everybody else is pretty much done.
Yeah, this was it's the thing that the team had turned around on lately was defense, and the defense, the first half was atrocious. Anytime you cannot stay in front of the ball defensively and a team can get to the lane at will, that's kind of what happened as Baylor got going in the first half. Edgecrom and Nunn, K-State could not stop those 2 guards, and then Orchard got going as well. Those 3 are really good players. There's no doubt about it. But K-State just looked slow guarding those guys. So that's number one. And number 2, you have another awful shooting night. Again, it's in the chat. We were told this was be a better shooting team. And this is now the 5th time in the last 10 games K-State has been under 20% from 3 on volume. It's one thing if you were 1 for 5 or 1 for 6, but you're shooting 25 threes and make a 3. That's a bad look. And then just K-State had no answer. I mean, you had a great game from David Gasson with a double-double in maybe his last game as a Cat. Great to see 20 points and 10 rebounds. But then everybody else struggles. Doug McDaniel had some moments, but, again, it's another one of those games where he's 6 for 17 or whatever, and too many turnovers, and just not enough for K-State. And then your ancillary pieces, Max Jones, Brendan Housen, Coleman Hawkins, and Hawkins shouldn't be an ancillary piece, but he went from having maybe his best game as a Cat to, again, one of his worst. So many things go wrong for K-State in this game, and it's what I said on a tweet after is disappointing finish to a disappointing season.
Yeah, and for a team that we, during that 6-game win streak, we talked about, hey, they're fighting, they're giving, they're doing what they can, but too many times over this closing stretch, it kind of looked like they shut down. And you think about, they finished their year after that 6-game win streak. They only win 3 more games. Well, the teams they beat in those 3 games, they all themselves have essentially quit on the season. Cincinnati got run out of the building today. You look at Arizona State, they're terrible. That 5-point game last night. That's why I didn't walk away with the warm and fuzzies last night like I wanted to. I wanted to be able to do that, but K-State didn't take care of business last night like they should have against a crappy team. So now you get a team that's just okay in Baylor, and it wasn't even a competition for the Bears tonight. Same type of deal. Colorado, worst team in the Big 12. K-State, honestly, probably pretty lucky they didn't get the 9 seed because Colorado would have beat them yesterday. So it's not good. And embarrassing is the word that should characterize everything that happened to K-State basketball this year. Don't put it on the individual players. While there were some that had embarrassing moments or efforts, it's just more so a reflection of this season was a failure. Jerome Tang and his staff they would have to admit it, I'd imagine. This was an embarrassing performance for them. Missing the tournament back-to-back years is inexcusable. And because of the way it's looked the last 2 years now, there are serious questions about, can they get this thing back on the rails? Because the indication is no, and we didn't get the answers we wanted on the Doug McDaniel thing. We thought we were getting there. We thought it was, hey, it's a guarantee. But, again, we're left questioning, does that make sense? And how does that benefit you in a lot of ways? It's just K-State's in a rough spot right now. And to the people asking about Tang, and, again, he's not going anywhere. He will be the coach at K-State next year. Can he get it figured out? I think he could. But there are a lot of things that need to change. I mean, you talked about the shooting, again, atrocious. Good for them. They did finally get a good look for Brennan Hazen, like drawn up. They did it perfectly. He hit it. Might be the best thing they've done on offense on one singular possession all year. Outside of that, they didn't look good on offense again. So if whoever has a hand in offense probably shouldn't be here next year. The defense looked terrible tonight. And while the defense came around towards the latter part of the year, that's just a performance that can't happen. There are so many things that need to be drastically changed, and I certainly don't think that can happen with everything staying the same next year, that being the coaches and players on the team. You're going to need another big shakeup, and that's a giant roll of the dice in college basketball.
Yeah, we talked about it after the Iowa State game that there has to be changes in this offense. Today, I thought it was more the defense's problem than the offense. But the second half, after the winning streak, the offense has been a bigger problem than the defense more often than not. But, again, you can't have nights where you are this bad shooting the ball and winning college basketball. And some of it is they're not generating good shots. I mean, there were just a lot of forced threes, one-pass threes, point-to-wing threes. And you compare that to what Baylor was getting. Baylor was getting driving kick threes, inside-out threes. And when K-State has made threes, that's been the kind of shots that they generated, but they were not able to generate those tonight. And as the game went along, they really had no answer on the offensive end. They tried the screen game with Doug McDaniel and some others. And part of the issue is off the dribble, Doug McDaniel's the only guy that can really play off of a screen. You get Max Jones in space sometimes, get to the rim, but Doug McDaniel's the only guy that can go create a shot. Coleman Hawkins tried to. I do think I don't want to give him too much of an excuse. I think we talked about last night after the game. He played well, but can he do that 2 nights in a row on this knee? And he showed tonight that wasn't going to be the case. So that combination, just not good. And then you're right. Now the question becomes, where do you go from here? Who do you keep? What do you do on your staff? And clearly you're kind of in a tough situation because on one hand, you don't want to completely rebuild for the 4th year. But on the other hand, who's good enough to keep? And you really don't have anybody great to keep. You don't have a all Big 12 type player coming back. So that puts you in a tough spot with this staff and what they're going to do.
Yeah, so as we sit in the dark as they get ready to introduce the UCF Knights, Ron says, Mason, what gives you any reason to think Tank can figure this out next year? The only thing that does give me that thought is that we saw him do it in year 1. He had nobody that he had known before he got to K-State. So it's a whole new team to him. They built it in 1 year. They made a great team. They went to the Elite Eight, and that's the example that I use where this is not a situation of needing to retain players. Like, roster retention is the overrated aspect. It's the fact that people retain players because they're good players and they have the right mindset to help contribute and compete. And that's where you need this reset, because we know this team just didn't have it, but people have brought it up enough times. Like, you got good moments from Coleman Hawkins and Doug McDaniel this year, but not a great look for the guys that are supposed to be your 2 best players to be bitching about the conditioning that was done in the offseason on a podcast. That can't happen. You can't have your point guard, Doug McDaniel, spend the first 2.5 months of the season pouting and not doing the right thing and not even get to play in some games. He only played like 5 minutes at Wichita State. He should have scored 20 against Wichita State with what they had. And then you can just go down the list of problem after problem. And so the only thing you have there is that they can kind of win the lottery again, and that's what happens. Now, why there's so much wishy-washy thought process in this, who do you bring back, how do you do it? It's because if you look at the situation for K-State, Doug McDaniel is a guy that you go, he's not a surefire. You bring him back, and he should be your number one guard. Max Jones is a guy that you want the waiver for, but if Max Jones comes back and he's in the starting lineup next year, I don't think K-State's making the NCAA tournament, or if they are, they're sneaking in on the bubble. Like, that's the problem with the guys you bring back. It's not even as clear-cut as some of the guys last year, where, you know, people, I think, have the Kaluma thing kind of confused on where, or a lot of people that wanted to shove him through the door. They needed to upgrade in some ways, but, like, Kaluma's a guy that you said, hey, if you can come back, you come back. I think people were pretty much over Cam Carter. You'd seen what it was, but, like, Day-Day Ames, you knew you wanted him to come back last year. David Gasson, you knew you wanted him to come back last year. You had guys that you could identify and say, for sure, come back. Right now, Brendan Hausen is the only guy that I say with 100% certainty I want back next year, because I know he does something at a high level that translates in the Big 12. I think Doug McDaniel can sometimes. I think Max Jones can sometimes. But they can't. They didn't do it enough at a level to make me say 100% you're back, and they don't probably deserve the same role they had this year. Like, I think K-State's a really good team next year if Max Jones is a sixth man. He could win sixth man of the year in the Big 12. The problem was most nights this season he had to be K-State's third best player, and that's just not who he is. Doug McDaniel, he just finished his third season of college basketball. What he is probably going to be what he is. Like, Marquise Noel at least shot it better than this. Didn't turn it over as crazy as he did. Like, Marquise Noel, to me, looked like a better basketball player after his third year of college, or his junior year going into his final year of eligibility, than Doug McDaniel. Like, that's where there are serious issues, and what makes this so complicated, that you can't just retain things and run it back, because the team would suck again next year. So you're just going to have to pick a couple pieces, hope for the best, and try and reset this sucker. And that's where this staff is really going to have to show up. And their first step towards correcting their path and redeeming themselves is by identifying the right type of players and their talent, bringing them in, and then they also have to be able to come through and be good on the actual coaching end, because I think, as we saw in a lot of aspects, I think the K-State coaching staff failed their team this year, both on and off the floor.
Yeah, I mean, there's this balance of players and scheme. I've always been an advocate of players make plays, but you got to have a good scheme that fits them as well. And I don't know that either one, especially on the offensive end, was a great mix this year. You know, you lose some pieces, and that's another issue that K-State's had to deal with. You've talked about earlier in the year, kicking off two players now in two straight seasons, and two guys that you were going to count on.
Yep.
Okay, and you can't have that kind of thing happen, because that changes, because you work all summer and during your preseason 2 seasons in a row planning on having a guy there that's not there in Big 12 play at all. That's a major problem. The defense was so bad early this year. That's really why K-State lost most of the time in the non-conference, because our defense was pathetic. But they fixed that in the Big 12 for the most part. It wasn't great tonight, of course, but for the most part, it became a top 40 defense in KenPom. You can live with that. But again, the imbalance of when those things come together, how long it takes to come together, how long it takes to get your team together. Again, and that's what you talked about. You've got to vet the transfer portal especially, and make sure you get guys that fit. They did not do that last year. They eventually came together sort of great in the 6-game stretch. But as we know, a basketball season is 31 games, not 6. Yeah. And this team had a great 6-game run, but that's not good enough. And this staff has to know that. And this staff has to know 3 straight years of not making the NCAA tournament is probably going to put them in a really tough spot. And so they really have to work and get things right as they go into the next season. And you're right. You know, outside of Doug, Max, Brendan Housen, Moby, and Castillo. I mean, but the problem with Moby and David Castillo is they're at best role players right now in their careers. You have three guys that have shown they can play at times in the Big 12, and then a couple others that you really don't know about, and then one that redshirted and didn't play at all in the Big 12. So you're kind of at a loss of what you're going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. That the list doesn't stop at just a couple of guys. Like there are others that you would welcome back, but like you said, they're not going to do anything. You can't count on them to contribute next year. Like you can bring back Castillo, you can bring back Taj Manning, you can bring back Moby. Those are all fine, but they're not going to play 20 minutes a game next season. And really, two of those guys will never play 20 minutes a game in their career. Castillo, you would still hold out hope that it could get there. What we saw this season was very concerning, though. The positive would be that he, over the last couple of games, I think became a trustworthy defender. You saw that he could do that. So if the shooting comes around, that becomes a legitimate guy that you can play. If he can knock down threes and then be one of your better defenders, that works out. So I think that's worthy of keeping. But in an era where resources are so important, don't overcommit to guys that are just average. And that's essentially what this staff did this year, was they overcommitted to guys that were average before in their career. And when they got to K-State, some of them stayed average. Coleman Hawkins, Doug McDaniel, and others, I don't even know how they were average in their last stop. Ugonna and Yinso, Chor. Like, those guys were worthless to K-State this year, and they got paid legitimate currency in the NIL landscape to come be legit players, and they were nowhere near that. Now, I would also say this. You talked about, how long a basketball season is. K-State played 6 good games this year. That's about 18% of the season, which is a fitting metaphor because this team plays about 18% good minutes over the course of a college basketball game, and the rest is not very good, and most of the time looks like a team that should have been hanging out in the basement with Colorado this year. So the little things, they multiply, and from a bigger perspective, they are the big things. And it really should be inexcusable at this point for K-State basketball to look like this when you have the resources that they did last year. And this is an offseason where Jerome Tang really has to find his way again, and it's going to suck for him. Like, this is people, I think, get this confused. Like, I think some people turn this into disliking and hating Jerome Tang. I don't hate Jerome Tang, the person. I hate a lot of what he did basketball-wise this year, but he thought he was doing the right thing. And in some ways, I did too. Like, I'm just as big of an idiot for thinking this team was going to be good at the start of the season. But I thought Coleman Hawkins would, in a bigger role, be able to take another step forward. That didn't happen. Doug McDaniel, I thought, was a good piece. 2 years, you're thinking he's going to take another step. Bigger role. He might have gotten a little worse. He might have been more detrimental. Like, it just nothing came together. And then it's not on me to know what guys' personalities are. I'm just sitting on my couch watching Illinois or Michigan or whoever play. And I go, I like some of what I'm seeing there. These coaches have to be the ones that get to know that, these guys might be ones that go and talk crap about what we want to do as coaches on a podcast. Or, we might have some concerns here on this guy's buy-in. That's their job, and that's where they have to get back to it. To some of the old school principles of recruiting still matter. You have to be able to get to know somebody, and I know it's sped up because of how the timelines work and all this thing now, but you have to be able to feel comfortable with the person and get the right guys mixed with the talent, and that's why they hit in year one of Jerome Tang. Marquise Noel, right guy with the right talent. Keontae Johnson, right guy with the right talent. And then Desi Sills, right guy, the kind of dude you want to play any type of game with or go to battle with any guy. That's who you want, and he had skills that translated. And then they had a good enough base with, I think, those 3 guys that everybody else was like, I want to follow. I want to be with you. And so that's why Naquan Tomlin was not a problem in year one under Jerome Tang. That's why, Ish Massoud, who he wanted a bigger role. Didn't matter when he got into games. He served his role that season, did it well, helped K-State win big games that season. And then they had so many other guys that they got the most out of, because they all gave a damn. They gave 100%, whether it was 6 minutes that they were getting or 36 minutes that they were getting. So I just think it's one of those things where you need a personality reset of this team. And that starts for the players, but the coaches also have to kind of have their own personality reset in terms of how they're identifying and what they're valuing.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key as we go in the offseason is the next week or two, who's going to stay, and getting that figured out. I think you got to nail that down quick, because there's a lot of guys jumping in the portal from mid-major programs that you might want to look at, and then you're going to have guys jumping in from power conference programs over the next couple days, really, after they end their conference tournaments. And then you got to think, Coach Tang has always talked about wanting guys with winning pedigrees. So that's going to be another balance on how you find and where you look as you get in the portal. This team is going to need to get at least 3 portal guys, maybe 4 or 5, depending on who else leaves after this season. And you need at least 2 starters. And I'm putting it as 2.5 starters. You want a guy that's going to be at least your 6th man, and maybe steps in the starting lineup and moves Max or Brendan Housen to your 6th man. So that's what you got to go get. But the issue is, we talked about Doug McDaniel being the main guy that can go make a play. You probably got to go find another guard that can go make a play, and that's going to be tough to keep either Brendan Housen or Max Jones in the starting lineup. How do you keep those guys happy if they do stay and they know they're going to be started over? So the balance of handling this portal thing is new, and then it's a different portal atmosphere. You've got the $20.5 million that Gene Taylor's got to figure out how to dole up. How much does the basketball program get? How much on top of that do they get for NIL? It's not going to be quite the same as just go pay to play like we did last year.
And I think that's going to hurt them in some way, that guys are going to know, well, you had this much last year, I want that. So if you get into that situation where it comes down to money, I think K-State will lose out a lot this upcoming offseason.
Yeah, and the issue is there's going to be some programs that can still afford to do that, and I don't think K-State's going to be in that boat. Now, I do think K-State's probably not as bad as we think, even with a bad season.
Yeah.
K-State donors want to win,
yeah,
and they're still going to give this program money, and there's still some of those people that still have a good relationship with Coach Tang that have that money. They're still going to provide money for this basketball program. It's not going to go to zero, but it's a different system, and that's kind of tough because it's been a different system every year, and I think every year we've seen this coaching staff kind of struggle with that adjustment to what the new system was. We heard Coach Tang talk about in the offseason, I think it was Threemaw at the golf tournament, about this was a unique year because you could go buy a team.
yeah.
And I think they got caught up a little bit in that, and that's where not getting the right personalities probably came into play a little bit. And they just went and got 2 or 3 of the best they thought they could buy, and it didn't work out. And now you got to kind of start over again, and that's tough when you're going into your 4th year and you've made 1 tournament.
Yeah, just because you have $5 million doesn't mean you need to spend $5 million. You can be reasonable with it and make sure you get the right guys. Now, at the end, if you have leftover and you want one guy really bad and you want to splurge, then do it. And that's why, the Coleman Hawkins thing, he got $2 million because K-State had that left and they had the roster spot, the time of year, like it was the perfect storm for them to land him. And so that's, if Coleman Hawkins is one of the first guys in the portal, I don't know that K-State's winning that battle or trying to win that battle. But Jerome Tang is not in a position right now where the money that is there for NIL, it will fall off some, I'm sure. It doesn't deserve to drop to zero. He doesn't deserve that because I still contend that he is, if you're going to win, you would like it to be with Jerome Tang, because I do think he does have a lot of good ideas and understanding of the way college basketball should be done. And we've seen with a good team, a lot of those things do happen. But I think in a lot of ways they kind of lost their way in some of this, and they have to learn from their abilities. But because of the way this season went, it's very clear to me that next season has to be the final straw. Like, K-State basketball cannot turn into Oklahoma State and just be cool missing the NCAA tournament every year. Because guess what? Nobody cares about Oklahoma State basketball. Gallagher-Iba's empty as it can be. Like, And it's not fun showing up to the Big 12 tournament and looking around and not seeing enough purple. And that's not on the fans. That is absolutely not on the fans. Like, that's one of those things that is embarrassing as a K-Stater right now. But it's not on the fans. It's because of the product on the floor. And I don't blame anybody for saying, I don't want to drive 2 hours to go watch this on any given night. It totally makes sense to me. So they're going to have to get a lot of this flipped around. And my confidence level in that happening, I think it's higher than some. I still think Jerome Tang can be a good basketball coach. And I still think he can do it at K-State. But my confidence level is not above 50% because it is going to be difficult to do all the things that they actually have to do for this to be a good team next season. So any final thoughts before I let Drew slide in here to tell us what Tang said?
Well, Garrett, Kelvin Sampson was never in the realm of possibility for K-State. I hate to tell you that, but we were not going to land a guy that had already established Houston and knew they were probably going to the Big 12. That was not going to happen. K-State's position in the basketball world right now, if we had a coaching change, would be a mid-major guy, maybe a lower-level Power 5 coach, but not – you don't see coaches make Power 5 lateral moves to smaller market, and then we'll call K-State what it is, a small market Power 5 conference team. And that's just not going to happen. Kelvin Sampson was I loved Kelvin Sampson. I would have loved to have Kelvin Sampson. I loved him at Oklahoma, but that was never going to happen. I mean, I like you bringing it up, but that wasn't a possibility. I think with Coach Tang, it was really a matter of could we get Coach Tang or were we going to get Grant McCaslin? And Coach Tang had the better first year by far, and now Grant McCaslin's turned Texas Tech around. So those are probably two of our better possibilities. And we thought we had the right one. Maybe we still do. Time will tell.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, K-State loses 70-56 tonight. Drew's going to get ready to slide on in here, give us his thoughts. He got to listen to Jerome Tang and the players in the press conference and everything that was fun down there, I'm sure. Drew, welcome back to KSO Postgame Live after a little bit. How was it down there? What was the mood like? How was it? What were the questions? Like, was it fun? Did you have fun at least?
It was not fun. The vibes were pretty low. It about as snippy even as Jerome Tang has been in a post-game press conference. One of the questions asked was just about how to improve the offense.
More snippy than after Wichita State?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
This was he was asked about the offense and how to consistently get better looks, and he was not having that question. It was do you think that I really want to answer that question right now was the answer to it. So
my response would be, well, then when are you going to answer the question?
Yeah, so talked about that. Didn't say anything about playing in the Crown potentially, but I did think it was interesting. He did say that this was probably David Gassan's last game in the K-State uniform. So that's something to kind of monitor on what they end up doing and what they do, because I don't really know what they're going to do, because nobody knows, number one, who is even going to be eligible to go to the Crown.
Is it going to be a 3-on-3 tournament? Are you going to have enough bodies?
Number two, I don't know if there's going to be enough bodies. I saw somebody in the chat earlier say, when does the portal open? The Crown starts March 31st. The portal opens March 23rd. So not a lot of thinking was going on there. So you look at that and you're like, what is going on there? So I don't really know. The press conference, though, was very short. Like I'm doing a post-game notebook about just the entire press conference. I only got 2 things because I think 5 questions were asked total. And there was a lot about looking forward to next season and like what the messaging is. He wants all the players to know that he loves them and that it was a joy to coach them. But the vibes were extremely low. I mean, David Gasson was up there and didn't get asked a single question. So that's really how it went.
Well, because I don't think there were any questions about David Gasson's performance tonight. The guy went out there, had 20 and 10. We know David Gasson gave it his all season. I don't think there were many questions about David Gasson. it really disappoints me to hear you say that's how Jerome Tang handled it. So there was no legit answer to the question about the offense?
No.
This is the time to answer it. The season is over. You're 16-17. That should have been you don't get to pick and choose what goes on down there now. That should have been your time to kind of repent the sins of the season and think about it a little bit. I mean, that's just so disappointing to hear. Again, you lost 17 games this season. It is nobody's fault that you're getting asked that question except your own and every guy in that locker room. Be ready to answer that question now, or at least think about it a little bit, because that's one of your problems. Because you had Brendan Hausen, and how many times would he start a game? The only thing Brendan Hausen can do on a basketball court at the Big 12 level is shoot the three. And you'd go, he's starting games for you. You go 5 minutes without him getting even a look. That cannot happen. You can't go into all these games and say, oh, well, you just kind of want to get a couple on the road and then protect your home floor and then come home and get your ass kicked by 30 points on your home floor. Like, that is – we talk about culture so much. It feels like, again, this is turning into a culture of excuses. That is just inexcusable. You got to step up and take some accountability, and this is the time to wear it on the chin. When you screw up, you say, that's my bad. Here are some things that I think I could fix this with. Like, man, I get it, and it's tough for guys to handle things in a certain way. But everybody out there wants to hear something that makes them think that things can get better. And handling things that way doesn't make a single fan think that things can get better. It very clearly doesn't make me think that things can get better right now. Like, just a mighty disappointment to hear that. And that's what concerns me about, will necessary changes actually take place? Is there going to be deep enough self-reflection for this team, any players that come back, to fully admit where they screwed up and how to get better? And then that's where you question, like, were certain guys not pushed hard enough to buy in at points to where, yeah, it's totally on guys if they're being bad individuals and not stepping up and doing what they need to do. But also, to some extent, you yourself need to step up and try to do absolutely as much as you can to get them locked in. And I think you need a little bit more bad guy with your own guys and a little less bad guy with the people asking the questions or the people that are paying for tickets and coming to watch the product.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from the entire game is I would just say it is not lost on me how ironic it is that this team looked exhausted after playing one game, and how Doug and Coleman, all they did before the season was kind of crap on Shark Week. So the irony is not lost on me there.
Again, on that, team number one of Jerome Tang, they all talked about almost after every close game how great Shark Week and the stuff they did for conditioning and competitiveness was. That's another thing that it should drive people nuts.
Yeah, and then the other thought that I just have as a whole on this game is you're never going to win a game if you can't guard the ball. And K-State showed no real intent to ever guard the person with the ball. Second half defense was a little bit better. But this is the first time I'm looking at fans' charts because it is literally right in front of my face. There is a lot of red. And that's typically not how you win a lot of games. 1.37 points per possession allowed in the first half. That is up there with the numbers that I've seen in the Tang era, and even going back even further. But yeah, there just aren't a lot of answers that I think are happening that I think would make a lot of people happy at the moment.
Well, it sounds like there are no answers being given. So that's not a great place. Like, again, you don't have to go in and just give. That's not a question being asked to get a direct answer in terms of, well, we could be setting up a screen for this guy, and this guy could come over here and we could do this cut, or hey, did you see what we did with Hausen to open him up? No, that's a bigger picture question that should be answered, as in, well, we're gonna have to look at some things. We're gonna have to make some tough decisions. I'm gonna have tough decisions. Like we did all this. Like, to just poo-poo it and not even attempt to answer it, that's a problem. Because I guarantee you, if you had come up here and said, well, he kind of answered it like this, I'm like, okay, move on. But instead, I blew a gasket because it was a non-answer once again after a terrible loss in a terrible season that nobody seemed up to the task of being able to answer the hard questions throughout most of the season. And the only guy that seemed to be up to that task was Coleman Hawkins, and he was trying to play with, a busted leg, and he gave it his all last night. And I think being forced to play 38 minutes was probably a little much for him. Like, he didn't do it much tonight. I'm not going to hold it against Coleman Hawkins. On the things that I'm pissed off about right now, Coleman Hawkins is not in the top 5, top 10, top 15. I don't care. So it's just so many other things. And if you had guys that had personalities more like Coleman Hawkins, once they're out on the floor and trying to get things rallied, this would have been a better basketball team this year.
I mean, your backup big could only be out there for 2 minutes and had to sit on the bench for the rest of the game because he was so bad in the 2 minutes he was out there. That really sums up how poor this performance and this season is, because that's more of just a roster building standpoint thing, because you didn't have another answer that you could go to after Ugo wasn't playable.
Yeah, a lot of talk in the chat about, Garrett says, Drew Mason, do you believe that Tang and Gene have a conversation about this season? They will 100% have a couple of conversations about this season.
And I would even go as far as to say that they probably do anyway after every season. At least that's how it should operate.
That absolutely happens. These will be conversations that are conversations. Like, I imagine Chris Kleiman had to have one of those conversations with Gene, whereas they sat there and figured out, how did we go from where we were in position and lose 3 of 4? Like, what needs to happen here? Because I know Gene Taylor is not a guy that tolerates losing. I've seen him act.
Oh, Gene gets pissed off during games, if you ever see it.
So, like, that will happen. That is absolutely going to be something that happens. And it's going to need to push some serious changes to happen. And again, serious changes that can't happen, Jerome Tang not being the coach next year. That's just not on the table. In this era where money is so precious in college athletics, more so than ever before, you just can't be wasting it. And unfortunately, even though some of you feel like it would be money well spent, it is a waste of money if you're going to go and dump $19 million to get rid of a coach who, again, at the end of the day, doesn't probably deserve to be fired right now, but the seat is hot going into next season, and that should not be something that can be denied. So they're going to have to get some things corrected, and just like Chris Kleiman had to, albeit in a season where K-State still won 9 games, 9-4, in a season where Chris Kleiman had to fire one of his best friends as an offensive coordinator, in an a good season, a fine season, pretty average compared to what K-State had done over the last 10 years. Chris Kleiman fired Courtney Messingham. Decisions are going to have to be made like that for Jerome Tang, and if they don't, we are starting day 1 of basketball season next year, whether we pick a point in the offseason or when the ball gets tipped off in November next year, where I'll be out on this thing, and I'll need to see a lot of games to believe that something has changed if they run it back with everything the same in terms of how this staff is constructed, because it's clear that the last 2 years it's not working. And that doesn't mean that guys are bad coaches, but it could mean they're bad recruiters, or it could mean they're great coaches and bad recruiters. Like, it could flip all the way around. Like, just, I don't know. This season is a breaking point for a lot of people. Now, hey, if you're talking about who do you want to have as a coach, nobody ever say Greg Marshall in the chat again. Not with a 10-foot, 15-foot, 20-foot, 30-foot, whatever kind of pull you got. I don't want to touch Greg Marshall with it. But if Greg Marshall was touching it, he might allegedly do something with that pull to you. Just, allegedly.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There has to be a lot of changes this offseason. Number one, I've said the offensive philosophy has to change, because whatever the heck they're doing clearly isn't working. So if you see that, no, Max Jones wouldn't just be a sophomore. How the ruling is going is that it's just going to be an extra year for some of these guys. But offensive philosophy needs to change. This is going to be probably the fourth offseason in a row that we hear that K-State wants to be a better rebounding team. So do you actually want to be a better rebounding team, or are you just going to say that? And then turnovers this year were better, but it can still be fixed a little bit. And then you have to be able to get guys to be able to be locked in on defense from game one next year, because that just didn't happen. The other thing that I'm seeing that's going on in the chat that I haven't really liked, and I'm going to take a stand here. If you're going to criticize Jerome Tang for one thing, you don't have to criticize him for like having faith and like thanking God before every press conference. That just feels really gross to attack him for.
And because every win or lose, he does go in there. It's the same thing over and over again. Like that, it's just how he lives. And I mean, we're talking like that's a good thing of Jerome Tang, to have something that he believes in that strongly and that he's used to guide him in a way that he's had a successful assistant coaching career for 2 decades. And he's come in and he's had a lot of players roll through here that have a lot of love for Jerome Tang and what he did with a lot of different backgrounds on that first team. That there were people year one when things were going well that wanted to attack Jerome Tang for that. I don't care what you believe, but you don't attack somebody for that. And like, I get how that, I understand as somebody that aligns religiously with some of the same things that Jerome Tang would say. I understand why that would be tiring to hear over and over again, or why you might think at times, hey, might be using it as a little bit of a shield. Thought all those things about Tim Tebow at times. I was like, okay, Tim, it's a little much, but you don't have to attack a person for it. It's uncalled for. It's not right. Like, there are a lot of things that you can go after this team for. That's one of them that absolutely should just not come out of people's mouths right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I just think that that's something, if you're going to attack him, say that it's because of how the offense or the defense tonight looked. But do I think that K-State can get to where Houston is? I mean, potentially. There is no reason not to. I was talking with some of my friends about this. K-State is a top 25 basketball program of all time, probably. If you look at wins, Elite Eight, Sweet 16s, NCAA tournament appearances, there's no reason that K-State can't take that step. It's just going to take good coaches, good coaching, good assistants, and then good players. So if you get all of that, there's no reason that K-State can't. K-State has all the resources to do it pretty easily, at least I think. I mean, yeah. K-State has a very underrated basketball history, and I think that's something that this is a topic that we can talk about kind of a day during the offseason at some point. That's something K-State, I think, needs to brand more, is look at all this basketball history that we have had.
Well, they need to do something positive because there's not a lot of it going on inside the T-Mobile Center right now. They lose 70-56 tonight. We'll see. It's why, last year it was fun to talk transfer portal. I think people were excited for it. Just kind of dreading it. There's nothing fun about K-State basketball right now, which is so disappointing because K-State basketball, coming off of 2023, I think there were a lot of people who would told you they were looking more forward to K-State basketball the following year than K-State football. And K-State football just won the Big 12 championship. It was bringing back their quarterback from that team and all these other things. And in 2 years, it has just crumbled. And they got to get things figured out because once you get it going, people are back in. People want this to be good. People want to enjoy this. But K-State is not in that position right now. And guess we'll see what comes next for K-State basketball. If they play in the Crown, whoopee. I don't know if they'll have the players. I don't know. Some of these guys, why would they want to play? Because I'm sure a good chunk of them probably think I'm going to have to get my foot out the door. So it's going to be wonky as college basketball is right now. And it's a lot tougher when it's wonky if you suck. And K-State basketball sucks right now. And that sucks.
I've even seen people talking about Javon Small. Javon Small wasn't even that great at Oklahoma State. So there are good players that you can find in the portal. that were just okay at their other school that have really taken off. And Javon Small is the prime example of that.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll do it some other time.
One more time, maybe two.
Yeah, you don't think they'll win in the Crown if they're playing? If K-State goes to the Crown, what other scrubs are going to the Crown?
Well, one of the teams is probably going to be TCU that has already lost to Colorado twice in 4 days.
DePaul, they suck. Georgetown, they suck. All these teams, too much postseason college basketball right now. It's a bad year for college basketball.
There needs to be less college basketball postseason tournaments than more.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. Thanks to Fan. Thanks to Drew. Thanks to everybody that watched, and thanks to everybody that showed up in Kansas City. Good to see Purple walking around when it was here. And hopefully when we're doing this a year from now, things have miraculously gotten better. Again, I don't know that anybody is 100% confident in that. We'll see how the portal goes, but as we've learned, building a roster in the offseason, it can look like a home run, and you can still end up with a pretty crappy situation. So that's where K-State fights the uphill battle, and we'll be here along the way to cover it. And also, basketball essentially done. A lot of football talk coming your way, which should be a positive for a lot of people.
We're getting closer to spring football starting.
Yes, we are. Thank goodness. All right, we'll get out of here. Enjoy the rest of the basketball this week, and try to enjoy it next week because for the second straight year and the fifth time in 6 years, you will not be having your school in the NCAA tournament. That also pretty crappy.